You're alone in a room, working at your own pace, moving however you want, maybe making sounds you wouldn't make in front of anyone. And then someone walks in or a camera turns on, or you simply become aware that someone might be watching. And something shifts immediately, almost before you have time to consciously decide anything. You sit up slightly straighter. You might slow down or speed up. Your face settles into something more composed. The way you hold a pen, pour a glass of water, or type on a keyboard becomes subtly more deliberate. Not because anything actually changed about the task in front of you. Not because any real judgment is occurring. Simply because you became aware of being seen. This isn't vanity, and it isn't the kind of performance anxiety most people think of when they imagine being watched. It's something much more automatic, much more deeply embedded in how your brain processes the social environment. A shift that happens even when you consciously know the observer has no stake in what you're doing, even when you know nobody is evaluating you. Even when you understand completely that the watching itself has no consequences whatsoever. B. Why the end of this video. You'll understand the specific mechanism behind why observation changes behavior automatically, why this happens even when you're fully aware it shouldn't matter, and what this reveals about how deeply social your brain actually is beneath any sense of conscious independence. Stay with this until the end, because the last part explains something that most people find genuinely unsettling. Why you behave differently even when the observer is someone who doesn't exist. Let's start with the foundational evidence. In the late 1920s and early 1930s, researchers at the Hawthorne Works factory in Illinois were studying what environmental changes improved worker productivity. Lighting levels, break schedules, physical workspace arrangements. What they found confused them. Nearly every change they made, regardless of whether it was an improvement or a reversal, seemed to increase productivity temporarily. The researchers eventually concluded that the variable driving the change wasn't the environment at all. It was the awareness of being studied. Workers who knew they were being observed worked differently, not because of anything in their environment, but because of the observation itself. This became known as the Hawthorne Effect, and while subsequent researchers have debated the specifics of the original data, the core phenomenon it describes has been replicated consistently across an enormous range of contexts. Humans modify their behavior when they believe they're being observed in ways that go far beyond conscious performance or deliberate impression management. The shift is often automatic, occurring in the same moment awareness of observation activates, without any deliberate decision to behave differently preceding it. Here's the mechanism underneath it. Your brain maintains, at all times, a distinction between your internal state, what you're actually thinking, feeling, and doing, and a model of how your behavior appears to others from the outside. Psychologists studying social cognition describe this as the distinction between first-person and third-person self-representation. In most ordinary private moments, your first-person experience is dominant. You're simply doing what you're doing without much active attention devoted to how it looks from outside. The moment you become aware of an observer, your third-person self-representation activates more strongly, and behavior begins to be partly governed by that external model rather than purely by internal experience and intention. This isn't a minor, superficial adjustment. Research on behavioral change under observation shows that people in observed conditions consistently perform differently, not just in ways directly relevant to how they want to be perceived, but in genuinely fundamental ways, including effort levels, attention allocation, pace, and even physiological markers like cortisol levels and heart rate. The observation itself, independent of who is watching or what they think about what they're seeing, is sufficient to trigger these changes. But here's where it gets specifically interesting, because it reveals something about the depth of this mechanism that most explanations of the Hawthorne effect miss. The observer doesn't actually need to be real. Studies on behavioral change under observation have demonstrated that the presence of photographs of eyes, simple, printed images of human eyes placed where they can be seen, is sufficient to meaningfully alter behavior in settings where real observation is absent. People donate more honestly in honor systems when they face images of eyes. They clean up after themselves more in shared spaces. They conform more closely to stated norms, purely in response to a stimulus that their conscious mind knows perfectly well isn't actually watching them. This reveals something significant. The mechanism isn't primarily about rational calculation of social consequences. Your conscious mind can fully understand that a printed image of eyes has no capacity to judge you. That understanding doesn't override the behavioral shift, because the shift is happening at a level below rational processing. The brain's social monitoring system, the system responsible for tracking your position and presentation within a social environment, responds to the signal of observation regardless of whether a conscious evaluation of its actual stakes would confirm the observation as meaningful. There's a second mechanism that compounds this specifically for situations involving real observers who genuinely aren't evaluating you. What researchers call the spotlight effect. People consistently overestimate how much attention observers are actually paying to them, how much detail is being noticed, and how much any noticed behavior will be remembered. Most observers are far more occupied with their own experience and their own concerns than with carefully evaluating yours. And yet, the behavioral shift triggered by awareness of observation doesn't proportionally account for how little actual attention is typically being directed. You adjust your behavior as if the observation were far more intense and consequential than it realistically is, because the system triggering the adjustment doesn't have access to an accurate read of how much the observer actually cares. This is also why the shift can feel surprisingly involuntary, even when you're fully aware it's happening. You might notice yourself sitting differently, speaking more carefully, moving with more deliberate composure, and simultaneously understand completely that the person who walked into the room isn't thinking about your posture at all. Both things are true at once. The conscious recognition that the observation doesn't warrant any adjustment, and the behavioral adjustment happening anyway, driven by a system that doesn't consult your rational assessment of the actual social stakes before activating. Here's the part that most people find genuinely surprising when they encounter it directly. The observer capable of triggering these changes doesn't even need to be another person. Research on self-consciousness and behavior shows that people behave differently in front of mirrors, in front of cameras they know aren't transmitting anywhere, and even when they simply imagine being observed. The trigger isn't the actual presence of another evaluating mind. It's the activation of the third-person self-representational system. And that system can be activated by any reliable stimulus your brain associates with the concept of being seen, regardless of whether genuine evaluation is actually occurring. Oh, what can you do with this? Understanding beyond simply finding it interesting. First, recognize the automatic shift when it happens rather than treating it as invisible. When you notice yourself adjusting behavior in response to observation, naming this explicitly, "I'm activating observation mode right now," creates a brief window of conscious awareness that can partially moderate the most excessive automatic adjustments, particularly in situations where you know the observation genuinely carries no significant stakes. Second, use the mechanism deliberately in situations where higher performance, more careful behavior, or greater effort genuinely serves you. If you know that the mere awareness of being observed reliably increases your attention and effort, strategically placing yourself in observed context for work you want to do better, working in a public space, having an accountability partner present, even placing a reflective surface where you can see yourself, leverages the same mechanism that otherwise operates without your permission. Third, recognize the spotlight effect's consistent overestimation and use that recognition to reduce the anxiety that often accompanies unwanted observation. When you feel watched in a way that creates discomfort, explicitly reminding yourself that the observer's actual attention is almost certainly a fraction of what your social monitoring system is treating it as tends to meaningfully reduce the intensity of the behavioral adjustment, even when it doesn't eliminate it. Here's what ties this together. You don't act differently when someone is watching because you're performing, or because you're shallow, or because you secretly care too much about what others think of you. You act differently because your brain is running a social monitoring system that was built over millions of years to track your position within an observed social environment. And that system activates automatically, proportionally and with almost no capacity for being consciously overridden, in response to the signal of observation itself. Regardless of who is watching, whether they're evaluating you, what they think, or whether they even exist, being shaped by observation is not a weakness of character. It's evidence of how profoundly social your cognition actually is, at a level far beneath any conscious decision about how much other people's opinions should matter to you. If this explains something you've noticed in your own behavior, tell us in the comments about a specific moment when you caught yourself acting differently the instant you became aware someone was watching, even when you knew it didn't really matter. And if you want to keep uncovering the hidden mechanics behind your own mind, the next video is right there, waiting for you.